Hello, everybody. Jim Rothermich with Iowa Appraisal on Land Talker TV. Uh, I'm a land appraiser in Des Moines, Iowa with Iowa Appraisal, and I also part of Land Hero, which is a subscription-based website that allows you to access cell data that I have created, and it's very high quality comp data. And so, in this episode of Land Talker TV, I've got Troy Louwagie of Hertz Farm Management in Mount Vernon, Iowa. And I can tell you right now, Troy is probably one of the top salesmen in Iowa as far as selling farms. And he is, I always call him Troy Get Her Sold Louwagie because it seems like there's a sold sign on any of his listings that he's got. So, Troy, welcome to the show.
Glad to join you, Jim. Thanks for having me on this morning.
You bet, you bet. Well, I appreciate you doing this, Troy. And tell us a little bit about yourself and Hertz Farm Management.
Yeah, so a little short history. I grew up in a small town of Grettinger, Iowa, which is kind of up by Okoboji, Emmetsburg, Esterville area. Went to Iowa State for ag business, graduated from Iowa State about 30 years ago. First job out of college, I was an ag banker in Manchester, Iowa. So came over there, 22 years old, didn't know anyone, and worked in a small town bank there. Ended up meeting my wife in Manchester, so that kind of tied my roots to Eastern Iowa. Worked there about 6 years, and then they had an opening down here in Mount Vernon for a real estate coordinator, and kind of took a little leap and came down here and started working in real estate about 25 years ago. Um, it's one of those things. It's been a great move. Working in a small town bank, learning the ag business, definitely helped. I mean, I still have contacts up in Delaware County and around there from 30 years ago. Um, it's interesting. I came down here, 25 years ago, started working for Hertz. So Hertz Farm Management, home office in Nevada, Iowa. I think we have around 14 offices across Iowa, Minnesota, Nebraska, and Illinois. Nevada is our home office. We do primarily real estate, farm management, and farm appraisals. And I chuckle when I started in this business 25 years ago, fall of 99, you could buy any farm in the state for under 3,000 an acre. Summer of 2000, a farm hit $3,000 an acre in Grundy County, and I still remember the guy sitting next to me said they'll never make it. And I chuckled, Jim. I haven't heard that comment in probably the last 10 years now, but it's just amazing what the land market's done over the last 25 years.
Yeah, for sure. It's back then, if you'd have told me what land sells for today, I just said there's no way.
Yep.
And boy, it's definitely changed a lot. And I think a lot of that has to do with the ethanol, corn being used to produce ethanol. That sure did change a lot.
It did. I was head of the RLI land value survey in around '08, and it seemed like that's right when this whole ethanol boom exploded. And that's when we saw the, grain prices go up, land market followed right behind them, but definitely played a big impact in that, Jim.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And corn hit like $4 or more back then, and nobody had ever seen anything like that
No,
at that
no.
time.
It seemed like
And
corn was around, yeah, low twos there for many, many years until kind of '08, '09, somewhere in that time period.
yeah, I can remember in early 2000, at that time I was working um, for a grain elevator over in Nebraska City, and I was in operations of it. And I can remember one of the merchandisers told me, "Get ready today because there's going to be a lot of corn being sold because corn
Yep.
hit $2."
Yep. Yep. A
And
10,
he was
10
right.
cent move was big. Yeah. 10-cent move in corn prices was a big move.
Yeah, and so he was right. The trucks were just rolling in, that's
Yep.
what everybody was waiting for. And I was like, wow, it's just hard to believe corn was only $2 back then.
Yep. A
And
lot's
that was a
changed.
high price at that time. So
Yep.
uh, well, Hertz is probably one of the largest farm real estate companies in the country. I know at keeping track of auctions, Hertz is typically at the top of the list, number one as far as volume of auctions, if not number one or number two. And you guys do a very good job getting those farms sold.
Yeah. So It's interesting, you look back, when I started here, we probably listed, Jim, probably 90% of what we sold. I mean, that was early 2000s, $2 corn. We'd go put a for sale sign up and wait. Back in '02, I think I went to Worldwide College of Auctioneering and became an auctioneer. And timing was probably right because as we went into '08 and then basically 10, 11, 12, we switched over to probably 80% auctions and 20% listings. Coming out of that little boom there in about 13, 14, as you know, we started switching back to listings. And then over the last couple of years, we've been doing some more auctions, but probably slowing back to a few more listings at this time, though.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Um, so what area do you cover over there, Troy? And kind of talk about, your coverage area and kind of talk about market conditions, current market conditions, and can you just speak to that?
You bet. So I work out of the Mount Vernon, Iowa office, which is in southeast Lynn County. And so I would say our office covers, I'm going to say Benton, Buchanan, Delaware, Jones, Lynn, Johnson, a little bit of Iowa, Muscatine, Scott, Cedar, Jackson, would be our primary counties we work in. Um, it's been an interesting ride. And what I tell people, what I mean by that is land prices, as we don't know, exploded around January 1 of 21. And we were coming out of our area to Rachel and COVID. And I think everybody, 2020, the market was just kind of didn't know what to do. At that time, we had, $7 corn, 7.50 corn. Interest rates were 3.5. Money in the bank, to put money in the bank was nothing. The government dumped trillions in our economy, and this land market just exploded. It was to the point where we didn't know what the market was. So we started auctioning land, and so it went up by 35, 40%. From there, it probably started backing off a little bit late 23 and into 24. But what's interesting, Jim, I believe this market has gained some strength the last, I'm going to say 60, 90 days. This was probably the first year I've ever had where all of our inventory sold this spring. I've never had a bare plate where every farm had sold, and farms were selling pretty well. And, people are asking, they're calling saying, Troy, with this stock market uncertainty, you're probably seeing land prices really drop off. And I said, actually, I think it's the opposite. Right now, gold prices are record high. And I think our buyers want their money in a hard asset, tangible asset that if we go into inflationary time periods, will do well in inflationary time periods. So I would say we put a floor under us. Our good farms today, Benton, Lynn, they're probably 15, 16,000 per acre. I would say some of the better farms are above that, but it just seems like any farm we put up for sale, we have a lot of demand for that farm. A lot of farmer demand. We're also seeing quite a bit of investor demand coming back in the market.
Yeah, I've fielded a couple of those questions here lately about, asking if the land market's crashing because, the stock market took such a dip. And I'm like, actually that's helping the land market.
It is.
Because it's driving those investors to buy land and because they want a stable asset.
Yep.
And they don't like all that fluctuation in the market. Um, you know, I agree with you, Troy, that the market just seemed just to get really strong. And as I was watching those auctions, last summer and going into the fall, so there was a couple of those months we had nine no sales.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, this market, it's really going to adjust. It's adjusting right now. And it seemed like we kind of got through the election and it just kind of seemed to cool off. I mean, I won't say cool off, but the no sales weren't much of an issue. And then it just kind of seemed to got better after the first year. Can you kind of speak to those time frames of what in your area, how all that worked out?
And you're right, and I kind of chuckle, right around the election time period, I received a call from someone says, Troy, get my farm sold. We have a new administration. This land market's falling out of bed. It's going soft. Get my farm sold. I literally hang up with that guy. And the next guy calls and says, Troy, this land market's going higher. Get me a farm bought. I want to know, I want a farm. And so, but you're right. It seems like, and I don't know if it was tied to the election, but something right around January, all of a sudden this market, a little rally in commodity prices helped, and all of a sudden this land market picked up. And I think it a little bit too, Jim, we had phenomenal yields in
Yeah.
2024. And, late, midsummer 24, late fall, nobody knew what they were going to have. Well, all of a sudden they sit down December, January with their lenders and they go through financial statements and they know their inventory of corn and beans in the bins. And all of a sudden, if they had an extra 40 bushels of corn, they've got some more money to spend on farmland. So I think it's a whole combination of things and just perfect timing that really put a floor into this land market.
Yeah. No, that's for sure. Boy, there's a lot of bad news out here on the ag side right now. You know that it's tariffs are one thing that you hear a lot about. That's probably dominating the news, but there's a lot of other things too. But it's just amazing how resilient the land market's going through that.
It really is. And, my experience is the people with money still have money. And so, it doesn't matter what stock market up or down or, have the tariffs impacted much of this, but the farm families that are strong still are strong. The investors that are strong still are strong. And ironically, we're seeing probably more beginning farmers buy farms today than I've seen in years past. We probably had 10, 15 beginning farmers buy farms in 2024, which is more than normal. Good to see. I mean, normally it's a 40 or 60 or 80, but good to see young farmers using those government programs to get some low interest rates and get a farm bought.
Well, that's some of the questions I get when I have calls from media. How can young farmers get involved? Or how can they buy land? There's just it's too high. Well, it is a barrier as high as prices are. Can you kind of speak what they do to those young people you're speaking of? How do they do that?
And it is hard for a young farmer to get started today. Go back, 30 years ago, Jim, I always tell people hard work. You could get a small farm operation, 50-50 livestock crop share. You could have 80, 90 sows and a few cows, and you could raise a family, get your feet under you, and buy a farm.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, today, hard work doesn't get you as far as, it's going to take money today. So that it takes capital. So that's the difference that's changed, which makes it a little harder for young farmers to get in. Right now, through the Farm Service Agency, they have programs where you can get by with as little as 5% down. And, sometimes the bank will finance the first 50% at potentially a reduced interest rate. And then the government will finance the balance in a second position somewhere. I think it's right around 1.5% for 40 years. So does it help? Yes. Is it still a big, pill to swallow to spend $15,000 on a farm? Yes. And so a lot of these young, I'm going to say beginning farmers, either, dad or family members helping them out, or they may work off farm to help, kind of get them started or get their first farm bought. So, but great programs. Every young farmer wants to buy his first farm, which, everybody does at that age. It's just kind of helping them get their first farm bought and try to get some equity. And it is harder when you spend $15,000 on a farm. It doesn't cash flow, as well as when, years ago when you were spending $2,500 or $3,000 on a farm.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. Just the amount of capital it takes now is just unbelievable. And for a young person to be able to do that, it's tough. It's really
Yeah.
tough. And so I'm
Yeah.
glad it's good to hear that some of these young guys are taking advantage of those programs and getting involved. But you really got to be involved with a family that kind of passes the torch on to you. And
That sure helps. That does.
yeah, yeah. Um, One thing that I'm seeing right now, Troy, is a big increase in sealed bid auctions. Um, can you speak to that? Why we're seeing such an increase in those in this current market?
Yeah. And so I primarily have done, I'm going to just say listings and auctions, up until 3-4 years ago. Both have pros, both have cons. One advantage of an auction is that you set a date, the farm's going to sell that day. You advertise hard for 30 days and you can basically set your sale date, your closing date, and get it done. Auctions work well because there's no limit. When you list a farm, you're setting a limit. And so basically switching over to listings, I always say with the listing, you need one buyer. And at an auction, you need two or more, because I tell people at an auction, your bidding quits when number two gets out. So your high bidder may be willing to go higher, but if the second place bidder isn't pushing him, it's going to stall out when the second place bidder gets out. So both have pros and cons. And it seems like, in my opinion, what we use a one chance sealed bid auction or sale is a little bit of a hybrid between the two, meaning we're setting a set time, we're setting a date, we're setting a closing date. And then what we're not doing is setting a limit. And so on a one chance sealed bid sale, we can still set the time, the terms, everything, but it's forcing buyers to give their best and final offer. And so I look at it a little bit as a hybrid. We're not setting a limit, but we're not taking it to a public auction also where we need multiple buyers. The one chance sealed bid sales may work better when you possibly don't have multiple buyers. And so it's a little bit of hybrid. In a little softer market, they probably work better than a public auction because, like I said, a public auction, you need so many bidders, whereas at one chance, you potentially need one bid or one buyer. And so it's, I've used them. I've had some work phenomenally well. I've had some not work as well. And so you just don't know, but it just seems like a new method that here 2-3 years ago kind of came up, and you're starting to see a lot of them.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of a hybrid between listings and auctions.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I know when, this summer and early fall, when we was getting all those no sales, I was like, they need to do something.
Yeah.
Because on a no sale, everybody remembers that last bid, you could ask them 20 years from now, what was that last bid on that farm? They could spit that number.
And you're right, Jim. And if you don't get what you want, it's hard to get that buyer to pay more because publicly everybody saw that number. A one chance sealed bid sale, it's a little more quiet, a little more discreet, not as publicly out there. So yeah, good. So
yeah. I can't report the results on those sealed bid auctions until after they close, but I do call the auctioneers and find out if it's sold. And in my auction data, I'll put undisclosed. So that means it did sell, but I don't know what the price is and won't find out until it closes. So
right.
So even though I wish I had the prices, but at least I know it's sold. So that tells me it hit the reserve. And so that's a good thing. And at least it's probably sold for market value, if not more. So so it seems like they're all getting sold right now. And so that's a good thing. I have talked to auctioneers that have said, they it's a new tool in the toolbox, and it's working well. It makes the buyers have to do their homework, and maybe they complain about having to do that. But listening to them talk, there might be a big gap between the top bid and the second bid. And they say, if I'd have went to auction, I'd have just been one tick over that second bid, and the top bid was way higher than that. So it seems to be working very well because there's definitely an increase in the auction companies that are doing them right now.
Yeah. And I think it puts, from what I'm hearing from buyers, I think buyers, they're put in an uncomfortable situation. They want that farm. Now, how bad do they want it? And I think a lot of the buyers may prefer an auction or a listing just because then they kind of know a little bit more transparency. But that's where sellers benefit from the one chance sealed bid sale, because it forces that buyer to give their best and final bid. I have personally not done a lot of one chance sealed bid sales. My conservative nature, I probably do more listings. And in the last year, I've had quite a few situations on listings, Jim, where I had one north of Mount Vernon here. I listed it at $17,000 an acre, good farm, low 90 CSR. We had a handful of bids or offers, I should say, right around 17,000. And I said, I'm not going to make this decision. We're going to switch this to a bid off. And so basically I said, noon today, be by your phone. And I'd call buyer one, and you need to be 17.1 and 17.2. And in 10 minutes, we ended up getting 17.7 out of it. So my argument is, on a listing, you can still get more if you do price it wrong and create competition. And so I probably listed more farms, more than a lot of brokers do out there. And I don't know why. I just kind of like the control and probably a little bit more of my conservative nature. But, if things really get hot again, I'm going to switch back and do way more auctions too.
Well, I can speak to this. When the run up was going on 21, 22, I'd be appraising a farm over there in your area and be, looking for sales. And I'd, go through your listings and see the list price on a farm that had sold and then look on the assessor's website and has this sale price and then it would be higher than the listing price. And I'd call you up and say, Troy, what's the deal on this? And you'd say, well, it's crazy. I had it listed at this and I had this offer come in above that. And then another offer come in above that. And it was just seemed like that was going all the time
Yeah.
back then.
Joe's Jim. I don't know what I'm talking about half the time, but no, it's because this market, it's hard to value a farm. I mean, I tell people that every day. There's a range of what a farm's worth, and you get two neighbors that want it or competition, it's going to bring more or bring towards the top of the market. And so, and it helps too, Jim. I tell people I'm old, and I say what I mean by that. When I put out a farm on the market, I usually know which 3 or 4 buyers in that area are going to buy it. And that kind of helps. You can reach out to them and get some competition going, which ultimately helps with a higher sale price.
Yeah, yeah. One of the questions I get a lot when I do interviews with media is what's the percentage of farmers to investors in your
Yeah,
territory? I think in your territory, I don't quote me on this, but I think it's probably way higher farmers because the prices are so much higher
yeah.
there. I mean, that's one of the highest areas in the state, in my opinion, as far as dollars per CSR2 point. I think it is probably the highest.
Yeah, in our area, the strongest areas I work in are Cascade, Iowa, which is all livestock, a lot of big cattle farmers. And I'm going to say Keystone, Iowa, which is by Benton, it's in Benton County, kind of north of Keystone. I mean, they have 90 to 95 CSR ground. They have seed corn country up there. Um, Interesting, question about who's buying the land. I still think farmers are buying 60 to 70% of the farmland in our area. And what you see, there's a lot of sales that happen directly to their tenant, that may not even hit the market. But when you do live closer to a metro area, like we live closer to Cedar Rapids and Iowa City, there are a lot of, I'm going to say, strong business owners that may have grown up on a farm somewhere that are buying land. And so we have a fair amount of investors in this area also that just say, hey, I'd like to buy a farm. I grew up on a farm. I'm 65 years old now. I'd like to get a farm, in my portfolio. One other thing too, Jim, we've had is, by our airport here, we've had a couple data centers come in. And I tell you, that makes a big difference when somebody gets a handful of $1 million and they're going to go out shopping and do 1031 exchanges. And so I've seen more 1031 exchanges now the last 6 months than maybe I had the prior year or two. And a lot of that has to do with data centers, commercial development, residential development going on, which kind of impacts that market a little bit.
Yeah, those data centers, boy, they've really plugged a lot of money into the market. We've had several around here in Des Moines pay big money for those tracts of land. They've got to have certain area. It's got to check all the boxes before they'll offer to buy a farm. But if
Right.
it does, they'll pay up for it. And I just went to the Realtors Land Institute annual land conference in Tucson, Arizona. It was in March, and everybody that was there was talking about, data centers coming in their area and buying up farm ground and what they are willing to pay. And they pay a lot for that land, but compared to the cost of that building they're getting ready to put up, it's insignificant.
It's all about location to power, energy, and water. And that's what's important to those places. And it's like you say, buying the land's the cheap part. I mean, it looks like a lot, but it's a cheap part in the whole project. So,
Right.
and the companies doing this, it's all about location and power and water.
Yep. Yep. That's what I heard. That's for sure. That's for sure. Um, so how is the phone calls coming in for sales this fall and kind of speak to that and kind of think where you think the market's heading the next 6 months?
Yeah, good question. So normally, Jim, I say my March, April, May time period are my slow time period. And what I mean by that, that's when you've sold out of your, kind of winter inventory, planning's going on in full force, and people are talking about selling sometime, I'm going to say midsummer and into fall. I don't know why, but this spring has been as busy as it probably has been in my career. And, I tell people my number one customer is when mom and dad pass away in their 80s and 90s, and the kids, there's 4 to 6 kids, and they're going to sell the land. And I tell people, unfortunately, good or bad, people die in good times and bad times. And when mom and dad pass away, that's normally when the kids call and say, we may want to sell the farm. And so I would say I've been very, I should say, happy with the calls I've had the last month on potential sales coming this summer. And we're probably putting some farms in the market here in the next 30 days just to get them going. I think we're going to have a good, strong market through the summer. So far, we've had some nice rainfall. A lot of crops got in early. We're planting again right now pretty hard. The farmers did get a little bonus government payment here in the last month, which definitely helped out. And so I think, going forward, just seeing what our supply and demand on corn, what our corn price is going to do. But I think right now we're going to see a good, strong market, through the summer and into fall.
Yep. No, I agree with you. Troy, last summer when we was getting hit with all those no sales, man, it was just every month. And
Yeah.
I thought, the market's gonna cool. It had cooled off probably 10% from the peak. And I thought we're going another 10% because if history repeats itself, I felt that when we had the last run up in 2013, 2012, 2013, 2014, the market cooled off 20%, and then it was just flatlined up until 2020, up until the
Yeah.
COVID hit. And so I thought, all right, this thing's going to correct itself 20%. That's just the way it's going to be. And it's amazing how it just kind of stopped at 10%. And now we're kind of flatlined right now. So I don't think we're
Yeah.
going to do that. It
And
doesn't
I agree
indicate we're
fully.
going to do that.
When we dropped off 10%, like you say, kind of last summer, last fall, I had some sellers that said, Troy, let's just wait till the market comes back again. Let's sit on this farm. And I just said, keep in mind, last time we had a hot market was 12, 13, 14, and it took 7 years to come back. And I'm not saying history always repeats itself, but we were in a flat 350 corn for essentially 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. And so I told a lot of my sellers, I said, if it was me, I would get in front of this and get it sold, even if we did miss the top 5 or 10%. I mean, we all want to sell at the absolute high, but we're still in a strong market. And I tell some sellers, I said, keep in mind, if your parents would have passed in 19, you would have called me and we'd have sold your farm for 10.5 and we'd have been happy. Today we're talking 14 or 15. So, I mean, we're at record levels right now. Yes, we're off 5%, maybe 10, Jim, but I just feel like we're still in a very good market to sell farms today.
Yep. Talking to some auctioneers saying that they've had people call them wanting to sell farms, and then they're kind of hesitant to do it in this environment right now, just because of all the bad ag news that we're getting and the stock market volatility. If you had somebody tell you that, what would you say to them?
I would say I met with somebody this week and I said, if it was me, I'd get it on the market today and see what happens. So I'm not concerned, Jim. I think this, as you know, 84% of Iowa's land is debt free. Our buyers are strong. We have investors that are strong. People with money still have money. I shouldn't say concerned, but I think there's enough indicators that show strength in this market and a hard floor. And I'd say, get her on the market and see what happens. I just feel like it's we're still in a strong market. We've had some ups and downs in the stock market. The stock market's kind of got a floor under it a little bit and come back a little bit. So I would say get on the market and then see what happens.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think, statewide, my auction data indicates, we're 10% down from the peak. Well, the peak was really high peak.
Yeah.
And so we're still in a good market. It's still way higher than it was before COVID. So you're still selling that farm for a very high price. And we know where the market is today. We think it's going to be good in 6 months, but I'm of the opinion the sooner the better.
And me too. I say things are good. Let's get it sold now while things are good because we don't know what can happen. I mean, we've seen we've seen the housing crisis of '08. We've seen things like that out of our control. I don't anticipate any of that coming. Interest rates are definitely a factor. I know the Fed just decided not to lower interest rates, but they've come down a little bit. It would sure help out. But I know interest rates have definitely kind of how do I say it? It makes it a little more expensive to buy a farm today, but a lot of these buyers are strong and have a fair amount of cash and still stepping up buying a farm.
Yeah, well, I think in your area, there's probably the strongest cash buyers in the state. Just a very strong area right there. So, which it comes to understand, I always look at Iowa. It was settled, from the Missouri or the Mississippi River and moved west. So those farms are older on the east side of the state than they are on the
Yep.
west side of the state. So I think there's deeper pockets
And
on the east
that's a good
side.
point, That's a very and I think it helps to be by a metro area too. There's more money around. There's strong business people in Cedar Rapids and Iowa City that help push the market a little bit. And in our area, I mean, I think they say over 1 million bushels of corn goes into Cedar Rapids every single day. So you think about that, just the location of markets sure helps in this area too.
One thing in your area that surprises me is how well recreational land sells.
Yeah.
I'm amazed by some of those sales up there. Can you speak to that a little bit?
And you're right. And most our rec buyers, Jim, are, I'm going to say, successful people that have disposable income. And you go to, I'm going to say, Jones and Dubuque County, and I think it's crazy strong when you get to that area. And I mean, we've seen some rec farms, 300 acres, bring anywhere from 7 to 8,000 per acre, and primarily to recreate, have your own private getaway, shoot a deer, shoot a turkey. And so we have seen a lot of that rec ground sell extremely well. And again, it's not farmers buying rec ground. It's more of your, I'm going to say, successful, business people that just want a weekend or private getaway. And so, I'm with you. It's hard to believe how somebody can take 2 or 3 million and buy a private retreat, but that we see it all the time over in this area.
Oh, I know. I just did some rec land up there, and it would, like I said, it's 7, 8 thousand bucks an acre. I just hard to believe that, but it was there,
And not a lot of return, but a lot of people like this side by side. A lot of people like to hunt. A lot of people like to fish, and then just have a nice cabin or something where they can go away on a weekend and bring their family and friends and just get away for a while. But no, that market I thought would back off a little bit, but that's as strong today as it's probably ever been.
I've talked to several of the realtors that sell rec land, and every one of them is saying it's as strong now as it ever has been. And there again, it was kind of the same timing. They said it
Yeah.
was, going down, it's trending lower last year, and then after election, it kind of got better or quit dropping maybe.
Yep.
And then after the first year, they said people were just lined up ready to buy rec land, and they said there's buyers with less than $1 million. There's buyers with $1 to $3 million to spend on land, and there's buyers north of 3 million ready to go.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, that is
And like
amazing.
you say, they're large tracks. I kind of chuckled. I told a guy one time, I said, you buy a farm like this. I said, you have your own private retreat. You can get away. And I said, it's going to be harder and harder to find ground like this, as we go forward. Growing up in the 80s, you could go out and hunt on anyone's land and you had access to all kinds of rec land. And his comment, he's probably 65. I'd never heard this before. He says, Troy, he says, the thing I'm seeing changing, he says, our generation grew up doing what? Playing in the sticks, climbing trees, playing in the creeks, just out recreating. He says, my kids have zero interest in that. And he says, my kids have zero interest in my rec farm. So he just said he'd be interesting 20, 30 years down the road to see if that demand is still there for rec land. Because most people buying rec land are, I'm going to say our age, Jim, who grew up,
Right.
doing that sort of stuff when we were kids, more hunting, fishing, recreating, just that more enjoyed the nature.
Yeah, 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 for sure. Troy, one of the questions I get asked a lot is, are we in this wealth transition where we're, the they the media's always talked about we're coming up on this wealth transition, and there's going to be, I think we're in it. We're the next generation's inheriting these farms, and they've moved off the farm, and they're ready to sell, like you were saying. Do you think we're in that, and where are we at in that process?
Yeah, good question. As we know, most of our Iowa landowners, are north of 65. A lot of them, and something I've noticed too is back when I was a kid, it always seemed like grandpa and grandma would retire at 60 to 65. They'd move to town and son would buy the farm and it would turn over more. 80s kind of changed that. Once the 80s came, I mean, we lost quite a few, farmers due to the tough times. And now I'm seeing landowners hold their farm basically until they pass away. And a lot of it has to do just with the appreciation we've had. I mean, nobody ever thought they'd buy a farm for $300 an acre, back in the 60s and sell it today for 15,000.
Right.
And
Right.
so you're just seeing very, very few people or landowners, sell their farm before they pass away. It's just because they don't want to pay the tax on it. But I agree, Jim. I mean, when I started in this business 25, 30 years ago, we'd have a slow year or two, and then we'd see a little pickup and then a slow year. But it seems like ever since, and I'm just going to pick on 2020, ever since 2020, it's just been go, 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 go. And most of that is, I'm going to say, people passing away. And when people pass away, that's when they go ahead and sell the farm.
Yeah. That's what I'm hearing, just talking to different realtors. Everybody's saying the phone's been ringing and
Yeah.
people wanting us ready to sell on it. I'm like, it's because we're in this wealth transition right now. And
Yeah.
I don't know how long it's going to carry on, but I'd say I say we're at the beginning of it. I'd say next 5 or 10 years, we're going to see, pretty active land sales because of that.
I agree. I just don't see this market. I mean, if I was 30 years old, I think the next 20 to 25 years, we're going to see, I think they say, a huge percentage of our land changing hands just because our landowners are all 65 and above. And so the question is who's going to buy it all? I mean, right now when I sell a farm, most of the time I'm selling it to a farmer that already owns a fair amount of ground, somebody I've already sold land to. And so the question is going forward, just who's going to buy all this land? Land is getting in fewer and fewer hands, and I don't know if that's good or bad, but growing up, if somebody had 300 acres, that was a lot. Today you see a lot of farmers, that own a fair amount more land. So
One of the questions I've gotten lately is, isn't that a bad thing for an investor to own land? And I'm like, no,
yeah,
it's not a bad thing because they
yeah.
got to hire a local operator to operate that farm, and they're going to be buying inputs in the local area. So I don't think it matters.
Yep. Nope. We need investors because there's no way that farmers can buy it all. And so investors, like you say, they buy it, they're going to need a local farmer to farm it.
Right. Yep.
Yep.
Yep. Troy, we need to be wrapping this up.
Okay.
Do you have any listings you want to talk about?
Ironically, I'm trying to think. I think I've sold out of everything I have. I've got a handful right now that I'm hoping the next week or two are coming to the market. I'm trying to think right now what I have for, it seems like, Jim, I'd put a farm on the market in Benton County and we'd sell it in a week. And, I had one over in Jones County, good farm, a little rougher, and sold that in 2 weeks. So right now our cupboard is actually pretty bare. A little bit time of year. I mean, generally this time of year, things definitely slow down. Farmers in the field planting, but I'm hopeful here in the next month to 2 months, I have quite a few listings back out, auctions and/or listings coming that we can take to the market.
Well, that's why I call you Troy Getter Sold Louwagie,
Yeah, that's
because you
right.
got it sold
That's right.
so
Yeah.
fast.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. Just real quick, how's the planning progress in your area?
We had a very good run there late April. I would say it was probably 30 to 40% done there before the rain came. The rain came, kind of slowed us down about 10 days, but right now the planters are rolling again. I don't know if we'd be 60, 70% somewhere in there done. Jim, a lot of beans were planted earlier. As you drive through the country, you can roll a lot of corn. A lot of that corn's popped through here the last, I'm going to say, big weeks. So we're starting to see it
Troy, if somebody wants to sell a farm, how do they get a hold of you?
Great question. They can jump on our website at www.hertz.ag, or they can call any of our offices, or give me a call at 319-721-4068 anytime. Be happy to visit with you. And I always enjoy talking to families. I always tell people, when they sell a farm, Jim, it's different than just calling up a realtor and selling a house. I mean, with a lot of these families, this has been in their family for generations. There's a lot of emotions involved. And I just tell people it's a process. I mean, I'm not there just to sell it. I'm there to work with the family and try to make it as smooth a transition as we can.
You bet, you bet. It's a life event. So just
It
like
is.
graduation or
Yeah.
new baby being born, it's right up there with that.
Yeah. And it's
So,
amazing. I tell people by the time we're done, we're going to be friends. That's one thing I love about my job, Jim, is the friends I've made through the years. And you become close with families when you work with them over 6 months, and help them sell their family farms.
well, I tell you what, Troy, your result speaks for itself because you sell a lot of farms up in that area.
Well, I appreciate it. And Jim, I want to thank you. I tell everyone to jump on your Twitter link or X link, I guess it is, because I look at that every day, Jim, that really helps me know what's going on across the state of Iowa. And I'm amazed how many times I'll be at a meeting and somebody will ask me about a sale somewhere and I know the results because I saw it. I saw it on, so it makes me look good, Jim. So I appreciate that.
Yeah,
So
yeah. No, it's
a
good. It's
lot of good
good.
information you put out there, Jim.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate that. So, well, let's go ahead and sign off. Troy, thank you for being on today's episode. And this is Jim Rothermich, Iowa Appraisal, Des Moines, Iowa. I am a part of Land Hero, that is a subscription-based website that you can access my sale comps, and it's very high quality sale comps. So, we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jim.